Can you guys see my sheets of paper? Can someone please unmute and confirm? Hello?
Yes, sir, we can.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So let us get started. So the topic for today's lecture is control of single input, single output systems. Let me put feedback control. Single input, single output systems. So let us recap what we discussed in the previous lecture. So in the previous lecture, we looked at two important kinds of problems that all of us, confront as engineers. We confront, and those problems are the problems of uncertainty about the environment in which our systems operate, and the uncertainty about the system's model itself. So I first started out by talking about how this problem is sort of universal. It is not restricted to the mechanical engineer designing a car or an aerospace engineer designing a airplane or any such thing. I took examples from various disciplines, including biology, to point out that this challenge of getting your systems to operate, unaffected in the face of the external ambient or the internal conditions not being known precisely, is something that a lot of systems have to confront. Okay, and in this context, we also notice that some of the control strategies that we have discussed so far, the most prominent of which is feedback linearization, because of the generality of that approach, it fails because it is based on the assumption that we know the states of the system and we know the structure of the system. Okay, so the first point was that feedback linearization fails in the face of uncertainty in plant dynamics and or presence of disturbances. So disturbances was the word that we used to capture inputs to the plant that are not in our control. And plant dynamics, of course, is something that we know, but there could be uncertainties in it because its inertia may not be known very well, and its spring constants may not be known very well, etc., etc. Then we saw that feedback, control systems is a cross-disciplinary subject. So it is sort of superfluous to talk of control of mechanical systems specifically, unless you are talking of specialized hardware that is suitable for mechanical systems. Otherwise, as we have been as we have been discussing so far, a mechanical system can be represented to an adequate degree of accuracy through its mathematical model. And once I have the mathematical model, the physical appearance of the system is irrelevant. I just work with the mathematical model and come up with define an input, define an output, or a variable that I want to control, and come up with a control law or another algorithm or a mathematical relationship that allows me to achieve the desired output variable in the face of uncertainty in the the structure of that model or some other input affecting the model, and so on and so forth. Okay, so then we saw how we so that formed the basis for us to get the physical appearance of the system out of the picture. For all future discussions, we would be focused only on its mathematical model. And given a mathematical model, what is the general approach to get that system to do our bidding, to dance to our tunes? So the problem, therefore, the solution to this problem of getting a system to dance to our tunes was to invert the dynamics of the model, invert the dynamics of the system. Okay, so general control problem. can be solved by inverting the dynamics of the system. And the system we decided we'll call it the plant, because this is what is used in control systems literature. And often this can be done, in case the disturbances acting on the system are small and the plant structure is known very well, the model is known very well, then we can use open loop control to get the system to do our bidding. Okay, but the real challenge is to get it to do our bidding in the face of uncertainties. Okay, so control of uncertain systems is the real challenge, and we discovered that there is a general approach to this problem. Okay, of course, the steps that we outlined were slightly vague, because we assumed that there was some operator F that connected U to the output Y, and then there was some other high gain operator H which connected the error E to the control effort U, and so on. But what we discovered, despite the slight vagueness in this analysis, what we discovered and what was useful from that analysis was that there was a general property to this function H, or some mapping H between the error E and the control effort U, that guarantees that despite uncertainty in the plant's dynamics and despite the existence of disturbances, we can invert the plant's dynamics. Okay, and that property was one of high gain. So if I take the ratio of the output of this mapping H to its input, I should get a large number. The larger the better, if all I'm concerned about is getting the output to output to track a certain reference is concerned. Okay, so high gain feedback based plant inversion. So in order to perform this, we discovered that in the presence of uncertainty and we don't know the model very well, we cannot use this high gain function with a toy model that we would have built in a computer. So instead we have to invest in sensors, and if you use sensors in combination with high gain, then you have a possible way to address this problem of control of uncertain systems. Okay, so there is some promise in that direction. Okay, any questions? Okay, so feedback based plant in high gain feedback based plant inversion. So I shall draw the block diagram again. So our dynamic system is simply captured by means of this mathematical relationship F between the input or the control effort U and the output Y. Now if I have to invert this when I don't know F very well, and when there are disturbances acting on this system, then what I have to do is invest in a sensor. Okay, so that is what this arrow means. Okay, you have to have a sensor, and then you compare the output with the reference R, and any error E is fed to this mapping H, which generates an output which is a highly amplified version of its input. Okay, and this wrapping around of the output measurement and getting it to affect the way we control our physical system is called as feedback control. Okay, and there is only one strategy to invert a plant, and that is to use high gain. Okay, there is nothing else to it. But as we will discover, may not be in today's lecture but in other lectures, if you are trying to control a plant, actually you have to wear two hats at the same time. One is of course the one that you are paid to do, that is the hat of a control engineer. You need to get a certain reference to be tracked or to be regulated, and some disturbance to be rejected, and so on. That's the hat of a control engineer. That's something you would willingly wear because that's what you are paid for. But then there's another hat that one needs to wear, which you will not be paid for, but if you don't pay attention to that, you are going to get fired. And that is one of stability engineering. Okay, so what is the guarantee that the dynamics of the overall system after interconnection of the output to the input in the manner that we have done is going to make, what is the guarantee that this overall system is going to have all of its poles on the left half of the complex plane? That is a problem that one needs to confront. Otherwise, if I were to uncritically crank up the gain, then it is quite likely that my overall system would be unstable. Then the whole thing is going to explode, and then you're going to get fired. Okay, so you have to wear two hats at the same time. One is of control engineering, one is of stability engineering. But before we talk about stability engineering, let us focus first on control engineering itself and see how we can come up with quantitative estimates of the extent to which we can track a certain reference or reject a certain disturbance. So that is the goal that we are driving towards in today's lecture. Okay, so before I talk about this, I talked about how the input-output relationship for feedback to be effective in getting the reference to be tracked. The input-output relationship should be connected by a high-gain function h, right? So let me give examples of a couple of high-gain functions. You might not have recognized them to be high-gain functions in the past, but they actually are, and these are systems that you might have also come across in your everyday life. So let us how do we construct this high gain function? It could be any high gain function. That's what I pointed out. It need not have anything to do with the specific structure of this plant f, right? So the most simple solution is let us say the input is error and the output is the control effort u of this controller. This is called as a controller, by the way. Okay, so the one simple thing is you can make the input-output relationship to be linear. Okay, and if the gain has to be high, by gain what do I mean? The ratio of the output to the input. Then this guy's slope, k, has to be very large. Okay, now if the slope is very large, of course, for even small inputs, the output is going to be quite large. But then the output of any physical system cannot exceed a certain threshold. It cannot run away to infinity, right? So the output will always, for example, if I'm taking an electronic circuit, okay, the output is always saturated by is limited by the voltage supply that I use to bias that circuit. Okay, if it is plus minus 5 volts, then the output of that electronic circuit cannot exceed 5 volts. So there is always a saturation that occurs in the output, and it cannot exceed a certain value. So this is a typical input-output characteristic. And if I tend this gain k to infinity, how will this input-output characteristic look like? Let us just look at it. If I tend the gain k to infinity, what happens? This slope becomes larger and larger. Okay, it becomes more and more vertical, this linear region here. And in the limit that k tends to infinity, it will almost look like this saturation region is starting from somewhere near the the y-axis itself. Okay, so this will be the error and that will be the output. Okay, so for any small error greater than 0, the output will go to plus positive value. Let me, for the sake of simplicity, just make it 1. Okay, for any small negative value of error, it goes to -1. So this is one avatar, if you wish, of high gain control, because in the intermediate region, the gain is exceptionally high, almost tended to infinity. Okay, this kind of input-output relationship for the controller is called as on-off control. Okay, now where do we see on-off control? Actually, it's everywhere around us. If you think of your refrigerator, okay, or your air conditioner, you for some time that machine will be very quiet. Okay, and all of a sudden something switches on, so you hear the revving of the motor once in a while, and after some time it again becomes quiet. So what that refrigerator is doing, of course, is trying to maintain the temperature inside a constant in the face of the fact that there's always heat coming in from outside, and the way it does it is by using on-off control. So it turns on the refrigerator when the temperature exceeds a certain threshold. Of course, in the case of the refrigerator, it's not the ideal on-off that is used. There is also some hysteresis. So in other words, you wait for the error to build up to a certain value before you turn on the refrigerator again. And then once the the refrigerator is cooled to below a certain threshold, then you turn it off. So there is a hysteresis, but otherwise it's on-off control. The same is true also with an air conditioner. It turns on when the temperature exceeds a certain threshold and turns off again when it drops below a certain threshold. So on-off control, therefore, although you might not have seen it from this light, is just one avatar of high gain control. What is the mathematical expression for this? It's U is equal to sine of E, where sine is the signum function, and it is defined this way. Sine of E is equal to +1 when E is greater than 0, -1 when E is less than 0. It's actually undefined at E equal to 0. What is sine of 0? It is undefined. You can define it if you wish to be positive or negative. It's up to you, but it's not very relevant. Okay, so this is one way of implementing high gain feedback. Okay, there's a slight variant of this, which again is a very powerful technique, but is not as but not found as commonly in our everyday appliances as this one. Now, instead of the input to this signum function being just proportional to E, let us say it is some dynamic, it also involves a dynamics of E. In other words, let us say I have an out control law of the kind U is equal to sine of E dot plus E. Okay, or some other E double dot plus E dot plus E, some such thing. What is going to happen there? To understand what that control law does, let us look at what this control law is doing. What this control law is doing is it's driving E to 0, right? Our regular on-off control is driving E to 0. At the moment E is at 0, it stays at 0 for all future time, because any small deviation in E away from 0 and bang, the control effort swings to either positive maximum or negative maximum, that immediately drives the error back in the opposite direction. Okay, so you can think of this as a line that the the error cannot escape from. Okay, once it is stuck on that line, it stays on that line for all future time. Now, analogously, if this is the control law that we have adopted, then what the control law will do is it will drive the system towards E dot plus E equal to 0. Okay, now once the system is on this obeys this equation, it will stay put obeying this equation for all future time. Okay, so this is called as a sliding surface. Why is it called as a sliding surface? Because this concept of a surface is in connection with phase space and so on, which you might not have come across, but you don't need to know either. Okay, but what it does, what you need to know is that this control law ensures that E dot plus E is equal to 0. Now, this is a stable dynamics, right? E dot plus E is equal to 0 will have its roots on the negative, the characteristic equations roots are all is equal to -1 in this particular case. It's on the left half of the complex plane. So the error decays to 0 at a certain rate, which is decided by the constant k or whatever. In this case, it is just 1. Okay, so this kind of control is called sliding mode control. Why is it called sliding mode? It's because this the control law first gets the states to come and sit on the sliding surface. This is a sliding surface. Okay, and then once it is on the sliding surface, it stays put on the sliding surface for all future time. Okay, so that's why it is called sliding mode control. But it's also a very popular control technique, more in academia than in everyday use, because it has some special problems associated with its functioning. But nevertheless, it's a very popular technique for controlling systems in the face of uncertainty. Okay, so here are two examples of high gain control. Both these are non-linear in the sense that the input-output relationship does not obey superposition and scaling. So if I were to scale the input by a factor of 10, the output does not scale by a factor of 10. So if the input was 1 unit and I scaled it by a factor of 10 and became 10 units, the output still remains at 1. Okay, it does not change to 10 or some such thing. So it's a non-linear control strategy. In this, in what we would discuss in the remainder of this course, we will restrict ourselves to linear control strategies, where the controller itself is a linear system. Why do we do that? Despite, of course, the widespread use and popularity of techniques such as on-off control, we stick with linear control because of because it allows us to analyze the dynamics very well in a transparent manner for a general plant, and therefore allows us to predict whether the system is going to be stable or not. Such a analysis is far more difficult when you are dealing with non-linear controllers, such as the on-off control or sliding mode control. Okay, so now we shall talk about this problem of control of systems in the face of uncertainty using linear controllers. Okay, now this problem is not a simple one. When you have uncertainty in the environment or in the model, it is quite challenging to control a system and get it to do your bidding. So I think it is only reasonable for us to be modest and focus on systems that are lot simpler than the ones that we have been looking at, especially in the dynamics half of this course. In the dynamic half of this course, we quickly went to multi-body systems where we had multiple joints, multiple actuators, and we came up with a general dynamic equation relating these joint torques to joint variables and so on and so forth. So it was so easy to develop that mathematics for multi-input, multi-output systems. But just as easy as that was, control of such systems in the face of uncertainty is equally difficult. Okay, we were lucky. If we are lucky and we understand the dynamics very well and the disturbances are small, then we have a very elegant solution in the form of feedback linearization. If you are unlucky, on the other hand, then it is only prudent for us to lower our ambitions and try to control systems that are far simpler in appearance than the multi-input multi-output dynamics that a multi-body system would possess. Okay, so we would therefore focus on control of single input, single output systems. Okay, so there is one control variable available to me, and there is one output I'm keeping track of or I'm looking at, and which I want to change as I wish it to change. Okay, so this is the kind of problem that we would be focused on. If you think about it, there are lots of problems out there which can be modeled very well using single output models. So for example, if I'm driving on a car, the longitudinal dynamics can be modeled roughly by a single input, single output system. I mean, the vertical jumping up and down motion of the car doesn't influence the speed with which the car moves too much, right? So similarly, the vertical motion of that car, if I want to analyze the comfort that there would be associated with the the motion of the car, again it can be reduced to a single input, single output system. So there is this input of the ground being uneven, therefore that is shaking the car, and the output is that z displacement, the vertical displacement of the seat of the car or something else, which is suspended by means of springs and dampers and so on and so forth. So that also is a single input, single output system. Likewise, when I'm trying to change the yaw angle of an aircraft, again the other angles do not change too much. Okay, so even though I may have a multi-input, multi-output system, such as a car, of course, I can model it in 3 dimensions, and for changes in its orientation, position, etc., etc., and I can come up with a 6 degree of freedom model for a car. But the point here is that even though a car may be a 6 degree of freedom system, at least if not more, the dynamics along the different degrees of freedom are very nearly decoupled from one another. Okay, so there is not much cross coupling between the dynamics along the z-axis with the dynamics along the longitudinal axis and with the dynamics along the lateral axis and so on and so forth. So under the assumption that the dynamics are all decoupled to a significant extent, I can focus on the dynamics only along one direction, only for one particular generalized coordinate, and that would make this a single input, single output system. Okay, so let us, for example, let me just write down the mathematical expression that I would be interested in. So the general expression would be that the nth derivative of y plus a1 times the nth derivative, n minus 1 derivative of y, etc. This yn represents d by d by dny by, so nth derivative of y with respect to time. Okay, that's what this represents. Okay, plus any is equal to bm mth derivative of u with respect to time, etc., plus b1 u. Okay, this is the kind of input output dynamics that a system is assumed to possess. And now on the left hand side I have some inputs. Of course I may have, in addition to these inputs, some disturbances. Okay, and these parameters a1 to an or bm to b1 may not be known very well, and in spite of that I have to come up with the control effort u that gets my y to change in a certain manner. Okay, so this is the problem that we would be focused on for the remainder of this course. Any questions so far? So Bodip Sahu has a question.
Hello, sir. Good morning.
Good morning.
Sir, that signum function you have written, so there
Yes.
y dot plus e you have taken. I could not get it.
Why is it? Why? This is another way of controlling. Okay, it can be shown that if you apply just this kind of a control input for systems with at least second order dynamics and so on, you will have oscillations, you will have limit cycle behavior and so on. So this kind of on-off control is okay for systems which can be modeled approximately as first order systems, such as thermal systems, as the ones that you find in your refrigerator or or an air conditioner or some such thing. But if you use this kind of a control uncritically, for example, to control a mass spring system, you can have huge oscillations in your response. Okay, that's called limit cycle behavior. Okay, so if you, even for such systems, even for such dynamic systems, if you want the error to stay at zero for all future time, you need to modify your strategy somewhat. And instead of directly providing you as a signum function of the error, if you instead provide you as a function of some e double dot plus e and so on and so forth, then it reduces the rate at which e goes to zero. Okay, and that helps to improve the stability characteristics. Why will this be stable? The mathematical machinery of this is beyond the scope of this course, but suffice it to know that this results in more gradual reduction of error with respect to time than the other one, where immediately the entire control effort is used to bring the error back to zero. Okay, and that gradual reduction in error as function of time has the beneficial effect of improving the stability of the system. Okay, so that's one reason why you would want to go with this kind of a control law vis-a-vis the other one. Is that okay? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Sir, and there was E initially, sir, that was producing you said lots of oscillations, right? So in this case, after taking
no, this control law was can produce oscillations.
Yes, sir. Sir, after taking E dot plus E, means it is it reducing the oscillation or something?
It will go away completely. Okay, it depends on the order of the system. I mean, this sliding surface should also have an order which is one less than the order of the physical system that you are trying to control. Okay, so but if you do that, then there will be no oscillations. I mean, yeah, you can make the oscillations practically go away.
Yes, sir. Okay.
Okay. Yes. All right. So this is the kind of physical system that we want to control. And as I said, it may look like a bit of a step down for you guys, having seen multi-input, multi-output systems, to have to focus on single input, single output systems towards the end of the course. It looks like we are going in the wrong direction. You were going in the direction of increasing complexity, and all of a sudden we have decided to make our life more simple. And as I said, there's a reason for it. The reason is that it's a challenge to control systems in the face of uncertainty. So we have to be modest. And these techniques that we discover for controlling single input, single output systems can subsequently be applied also to control multi-input, multi-output dynamic systems. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing, as I said, is many times, except perhaps in the case of robotics or something, you come across physical systems where you can decouple the dynamics along different axes, and then you can focus therefore on dynamics along of only one generalized coordinate, which would depend only on itself and its higher order derivatives with time, and then try to control that particular generalized coordinate. So when the generalized coordinate dynamics of the system are decoupled from one another, then once again you can view them as n decoupled single input, single output systems and separately control them. So that's one other way, one other scenario in which a multi-input, multi-output system can be controlled using the techniques and the tricks that we develop for single input, single output systems. Okay. Now, as I said, controlling this is not straightforward. So let us simplify this problem greatly. In fact, let us almost trivialize this problem. Let us make all these derivatives of u, so the coefficients or derivatives, equal to 0. Okay. And likewise, let us make all the coefficients, all these derivatives of y also equal to 0. So let us consider such a system that the input-output relationship is just a simple proportionality. Okay. So y is equal to k times u. Let us say this is the kind of system that we are considering. What is this? If you think of this in electrical terms, let us say y is the output voltage and u is the input voltage. Then the output voltage is some proportional, some scaled version of the input voltage. So this is an amplifier. Okay. But the twist here is, maybe I don't know this amplification ratio very well. There is uncertainty associated with amplification ratio. In fact, this is precisely the kind of problem that motivated Harold Black when he developed the negative feedback amplifier. So let us take up that example again and see how high gain control can be used to minimize the effect of the uncertainty associated with the gain of this amplifier on the overall performance of that amplifier. Okay, so let us say I have this system which is an amplifier, and I've modeled it with this gain k. Okay, the input is u and the output is y. Okay, now of course an amplifier is intended to amplify, but for the moment let us focus not on this virtue of amplification that is associated with the amplifier, but just achieving insensitivity to the uncertainty associated with the gain k. Let us just focus on that for the moment. Okay, so I take this output, compare it with a reference r. Okay, and any error I have to pass it through some high gain function. And I am an engineer, and an engineer swears by simplicity. Okay, I want things to be as simple, as transparent as possible. I don't want to depend on complicated mathematics and computers if I can help it. Okay, so I will choose just a proportionality gain k1. That's all. So the error and the control effort are just amplified versions. The control effort is just an amplified version of the gain of the error e, and that amplification factor is k1. Okay, so let us say we consider this feedback system. Let us see how the choice of k1 can bring down the the sensitivity of the system to the uncertainty in our plant model. In this case, it's a simple static model. It's a gain k. Okay, let us take a numerical example to solve this. Let us say that the gain k is nominally 10. Okay, but it can assume values as low as 2. Okay, k minimum is, let us say, 2. It is expected to be 10, but for the kind of amplifier that HW Black was working with, he might have a box that was way off in its specifications compared to what was nominally supposed to be the case. And let us say it could go as low as 2. Now, if people in telephony were to use an amplifier, they were expecting 10 times increase in voltage or something with this amplifier, but they end up, to their enormous surprise, seeing only a 2-fold increase in voltage. Okay, so that's the kind of problem that Harold Black had to contend with. Now, in this case, we are not amplifying. We just want to get the reference R to be tracked by the output Y. Okay. If you have some ratio here, which is less than 1, then there will be amplification in this circuit. But for the moment, let us assume that amplification in this loop. But for the moment, let us assume that we are only interested in, getting R to be tracked. Let us write down the relationship between the output Y and the reference R if the reference is fed back in this particular manner. Okay. Let us write down the equations. What is U? U is K1 times E. And what is E? E is R minus Y, the reference minus the output. And what is Y? Y is K times U. Okay. I can use these three equations to obtain the relationship between the reference R and the output Y. Okay. So U is K1 times E, and E is R minus Y, and Y is K times U. So U is therefore K1 times R minus K times U, right? So I would have therefore that U is equal to K1R minus K1K times, sorry, did I make any mistake? No. K1K times E. Is that right? Wait a minute. U is K1, no, K1K times U. Sorry. So therefore, I would have that 1 plus K1K times U is equal to K1R, or U is equal to K1R divided by 1 plus K1K. Okay. Then what is the output Y? It's K times U. Therefore, I would have that the output Y is equal to K times K1 R divided by 1 plus K times K1. Okay. So I shall write this slightly differently. This is R by 1 plus 1 by K times K1. Okay. Now, what do I want as a control engineer? I want Y to be very nearly equal to R. But as a consequence of this feedback structure that I have adopted, Y is not equal to R, but Y is equal to R divided by 1 plus some number. Now, do you agree with me that if I make this number 1 plus 1 by K1K exceedingly small, then I can make Y almost the same as the reference R, right? So what do I need to do to make this number K1K exceedingly small? I should choose a high gain K1, right? So this comes back to the point that we were making in the previous lecture. A high gain ensures that your reference is tracked. But what is important here to note is that this number will be small despite what the value of K would be, as long as K1 is chosen to be large. So let us take an example. Okay. Let us say the gain K1 was chosen to be 100. Okay. My controller was just an amplification by a factor of 100. Okay. Now, what will Y be equal to? It will be R by 1 plus 1 by 100 times K. Now, nominally the value of K is 10. So 1 by 1 plus 100 times 10. 1 by 100 times 10. So this will therefore be equal to R by 1 plus 1 by 1000. Okay. Which will be roughly 0.999 R. Very nearly R. Okay. Y will roughly be equal to 0.999 R. More or less the output will track the reference. Okay. But the real difference and the real advantage of feedback becomes apparent when we consider the uncertainty in the model of the system. Okay. Earlier, remember, if this amplifier was operated in open loop, there could be a huge difference in its output depending on what the actual amplification ratio was. I expect it to be 10, but if it is 2, there's a huge diminishing of the output compared to the input. Okay, compared to what I expected it to be. Whereas here, let us see what happens. Since I have wrapped feedback, okay, let us see what happens when I have an amplifier with a gain not 10 as I expected it to be, but a gain of just 2. Okay, then Y is equal to R by 1 plus 1 by the same controller is used. So the gain of the controller does not change. It's independent of the plant's properties, remember. Times, instead of 10, the present amplifier that Harold Black has been given has a gain of 2. Now what is the output? It is R by 1 plus 1 by 200. Do you agree with me that 1 by 200 is also an exceedingly small number compared to 1? So for all practical purposes, even this particular guy has its output very nearly the same as the reference R, despite the fact that my plant, the system that I'm trying to control, has a much has a completely different gain compared to what I expected it to have. So what is 1 by this is approximately equal to 0.995 or something. I don't remember. This is like 1 minus 1 by 200. 1 by 100 is 0.01. So this is 0.005. So this is going to be therefore 0.995 R. Okay. So the other one I think had 0.1% error or something like that. And this guy has maybe 0.5% error in tracking the reference. As engineers, what is 0.1% and what is 0.5%? They're practically zero. Okay. So you therefore see that despite having a plant which was exceedingly uncertain, I deliberately took an amplifier whose gain could change by over 80%. Okay. When the gain was 2, the gain has dropped by a factor of a factor of 4. Okay. Still, despite having that amplifier, by using feedback, I can make sure that my output very nearly tracks my reference R, whatever that reference R might be. Okay. So here you therefore see the full power of feedback control. Okay. So the first reason why you would want to use feedback control is because you are able to achieve robustness of the output to uncertainties in the plant's dynamics. In this case, there's no dynamics, plant's characteristics. It's just a static relationship between the input and the output. Okay. Now the second problem, uncertainty in relation to the external ambient, the environment in which the plant exists. Let us see how feedback can help address that challenge also. Again with the same example, because that also was a problem in Black's times. Okay. So here you had an amplifier. Okay. But you had crosstalk. Okay. So the output from some other channel ended up affecting the output of this particular channel to produce an overall output Y, which would be a mixture of or an addition of those some other telephone line and this telephone line. So to give a colorful example, you would hear what your neighbor would be telling his family member in addition to what your own family member would be telling you. So this crosstalk was a big problem. Okay. So this was a kind of amplifier that Black was stuck with. So let us see how, let us call the signal, your neighbor's voice signal, as a disturbance D of t. Okay. So there is a disturbance that adds on to the signal that already is generated by this amplifier to produce the overall signal Y. So let us say I take this Y. I know what I have to carry. I know what information I need to carry. And that is the voice signal generated by my family member, not my neighbor's family. I know this reference. So now I compare the reference with the output. And this gives me some idea about how much my signal has been corrupted or contaminated by crosstalk. Okay. To avoid that, to eliminate that, I manipulate this error by means of another proportional gain K1. Let us use the same gain that we used in the previous example, K1 of 100. Okay. In this case, however, let us assume that the gain K is not changing. Let us assume that it is 10. I mean, you can also take K variation of K into account, but we want to focus on the second virtue of feedback, namely its ability to reject undesired inputs. Okay. So this guy here is an undesired input in my telephone line. I don't want this voice signal to get carried forward. I want it to be suppressed in relation to the actual voice signal, which is R. Okay. So let us see what the output Y would be in the presence of this feedback loop. Okay. So Y, according to this here, is going to be equal to K times U plus D. Right. That's this particular part here. And as before, we have K1 times E is equal to U, and then R minus Y is equal to E. Okay, so I need to massage this equation somewhat. So let me try to do that. Y is equal to K times U, and U is K1 times E, and E is R minus Y plus D. Okay, so if I were to change this, somewhat, I will get that Y is equal to K1K divided by 1 plus K1K times R plus D divided by 1 plus K1K. Okay, I just need to rearrange these terms to get this particular expression. So I can write the first term slightly differently to cast greater insight into what I can do as far as tracking is concerned. Okay, and the second term I retain it as it is, 1 plus K1K times D. Okay, now in the previous example, I saw the virtues of feedback when it came to dealing with uncertainty in the gain of that plant K. Now we shall see the second part here. So if I have a disturbance D, the actual fraction of the disturbance that leaks to the output Y is only 1 by 1 plus K1K times the value of D. Okay. Earlier, if I did not have this feedback, the whole of D would get added on to my output Y. Okay. Whereas now it gets attenuated by a factor 1 plus K1K. Now, what is this factor? If I have chosen K1 to be very large, as I have done here, I have chosen K1 to be 100. Then if K is nominally 10, then this number is going to be about 1 plus 1000, which is roughly 1 by 1000. Okay, so I will have a 1000-fold attenuation in the voice signal of my neighbor. Okay, if I use feedback compared to if I don't use feedback. Now, who would not want to buy such an amplifier, right? So this was the reason why feedback control became so popular in the area of telephony. The same is true even if I have a faulty amplifier. So even if my amplifier does not have its rated gain of 10, but instead had a gain of 2, then still I would get 1 plus 1 by 100 times 2 as the extent by which the disturbance leaks to the output. And that's going to be equal to roughly 1 by 200, which is less than 1%. It's 0.5%. Okay, so there is this huge attenuation in the disturbance as a consequence of using feedback control. Okay, any questions about this?
Sir? Sir, actually here you are taking input E only, sir. Generally plant may have some separate input also, no? E plus something else, that then my only output is there.
You can consider that also if you want. So okay, you can model the input to the plant. You are absolutely right. In fact, many times you have disturbances. So we talked about how an aircraft can be affected by wind gust in addition to some of the other inputs that we can ourselves apply. So suppose you have, in addition to the input U, a disturbance D, which together they are passed through the plant. So the input to the plant itself has a disturbance instead of at the output, as the situation was in the example of telephony that we considered. In many mechanical systems, there are torques, there are forces over which we have no control. So let us say this is the situation, okay? And then I have the output Y, but I don't want my system to respond significantly to this disturbance torque or disturbance force. I want it to respond only to the torque that I apply, In fact, we will take a concrete example of this anti-roll gyro sometime later on in the course.
Sir,
we will take the example of, yes.
Sir, this is U input is the from the controller only, no? This error, whatever error is coming from that only, no? U
is the controller, is the input over which I have control. So it is from the controller. Okay. D is the disturbance which over which I have no control. Okay, it's a disturbance torque, for example, or a disturbance force, a drag force that my vehicle experiences, such things over which I have no control.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so if you have this also, then once Once again, you see that the magic of feedback will work. How does reference R and I, let us say, take my K1 to be the gain. You can show that in this case, the relationship between the output Y and the disturbance D is given by Y is equal to K by 1 plus K1 times K times D. Okay, you will have other inputs which I have not modeled here. You will continue to have the reference to be 1 by 1 plus 1 by K1K times R. That continues to exist. In addition, the effect due to D is captured by this term here. Now you see that if K1 is made large, okay, so here we have made K1 to be 100, right? So what will this term be? The numerator nominally is 10. The denominator nominally is 1 plus 100 times 10. Okay, so there is again going to be a 100-fold attenuation in the disturbance torque that would act on our system compared to the situation when we have no such feedback based cancellation of the disturbance. Okay, so just as output disturbances can be tackled well by the high gain controller, so can input disturbances be tackled well by the high gain controller. In fact, there's only one general mantra in the entire of feedback literature for achieving desired performance in terms of suppressing or rejecting disturbances or tracking references. Okay, and that is to use high gain control. And I have shown you 3 scenarios in which high gain control has saved the day for us, right? The first was when you had an uncertain parameter, so the gain K was uncertain in the first example that we took, but yet we could get the output to faithfully track the reference. Similarly, you can get the output to faithfully also amplify the reference in a very similar manner, except that the gain in the feedback path will not be 1. So this is called unity gain feedback. Okay. If on the other hand I have an attenuation factor here, then let us say an attenuation factor is 1 by 10, then you will see that the amplification, overall amplification of this loop will be a factor of 10. Y will be equal to 10 times R. Okay, and even in that situation, the use of feedback greatly minimizes the effect of this uncertainty in the gain K on the amplification of the overall feedback amplifier. Okay. Next example was one of disturbance rejection, and in this case output disturbance, as this is called, because this disturbance adds on to the output of the system. The third is the case of input disturbance, where the disturbance adds on to the input to the system. And this is often a scenario that we come across in mechanical systems, where you have torques or forces over which we have no control. And we still want our system to be immune to the influence of those forces or torques. Okay. So the advantages of feedback, therefore, are very clearly highlighted through the examples that I have considered here. Okay. Now we want to therefore extend this to the next level of complexity. When you have dynamics also in your physical system, we considered a physical system without any dynamics, right? It was just a static relationship between Y and U. But suppose you have a dynamic relationship of the kind that I had written earlier. Okay. So the nth derivative of Y plus a1 times the nth derivative of n minus 1th derivative of Y plus etc. plus a n Y is equal to bm mth derivative of U etc. plus b1 U. Okay, so suppose this is the relationship. How do we go about analyzing the effect of high gain control? Of course, it is clear that we need to have high gain control, but what we are now interested in is analysis. Okay, if you looked at the examples that I took so far, this is the analysis. I can quantify. I can tell you by what extent my my reference will be tracked by the output Y. Okay, that's what analysis reveals to me. I can tell you by what extent my output disturbance is going to get rejected. Okay, I can tell you by what extent my input disturbance is going to get rejected. I can attach numbers to these things. If you give me the gain of the plant and its range of variation, and I know the gain of the controller that I have chosen, I can tell you, I can guarantee you the extent to which the rejections are going to happen and the tracking is going to happen. Okay, that's the kind of understanding that I have of my feedback system if I have a static plant on my hands. I desire a similar kind of understanding, a similar handle over the problem for the dynamic case as well. Okay, so that is where we run into some rough weather, because to handle the dynamic case, at the moment you are familiar with only one formalism, and that is the state space formalism. Okay, let us first, let us still not consider this most general case of having all the other derivatives of u also, but let us consider only the slightly less general case where you don't have the higher derivatives of u, but you just have only u on the right hand side, but you allow for all the n derivatives of y to exist on the left hand side. Okay, so the equation that would then become is something like this, is equal to some b1 times u. Okay, now I can cast this equation in state space. I can define y as as my state vector x, x1, and y dot as x2 in a manner that we have done and we are so familiar with over the last few lectures, and I would get my x dot is equal to ax plus bu form. Okay, so I would have y dot etc to be my state vector x. Okay, and then I would have x dot is equal to, or maybe I'll call this small x. Okay, then I'll have small x dot is equal to ax plus bu, and y is equal to cx. And if you see what is the structure of C, I know that the first element x1 itself is the output y, and therefore I will have a 1 associated with that, and then all other elements will be 0. So this is a single input, single output system. So C will be a row vector of dimension 1 by small n. Okay, what will B be? B will be a column vector. X1 dot is equal to x2, x2 dot is equal to x3. B1 will appear only in the last row. So this will be 0, 0 all the way to last row, and this will be B1. Okay, and then the A matrix will look something like this. X1 dot is equal to x2, right? So I'll have 0, 1, and other things are 0, and 0, 0, 1, other things are 0, etc., etc. Then the last one I will have minus an minus an minus 1, etc., etc., minus a1. This will be the structure of the A matrix. Any questions about this? Conversion of the differential equation that relates the input and the output of my physical system to the state space form. Any questions about this? Okay, there are no questions. Now, there is only one technique that we discussed for solving problems in when the system is represented in state space, and that is through pole placement. Okay, now suppose we consider the case of a disturbance, an input disturbance. In addition to the control effort u, let us say I have a disturbance ud also acting on my system over which I have no control. Okay, if you want, I will simply call this d naught so that you don't get confused with the symbols. Okay, so there is a disturbance torque that acts also on my system. But now my goal is to come up with a control effort u which cancels that disturbance by measuring the output y. Okay, firstly, what can we do when we have this problem cast in this particular form, in the state space form? We can use pole placement for controlling the system. So I can choose, let me ignore the part where I construct the state estimator and so on. Let me assume that the state estimator is already constructed and I have the state x available to me for performing feedback. Okay, then I choose u is equal to minus k times x. Okay, then suppose I'm just interested in regulating the position or something. I'm not interested in tracking something. I'm just interested in regulating. So my set point will be 0. So you can imagine, for example, a ship which is rocking about because of the waves at the bottom. Now I have the measurement of the extent of rocking through my rate gyro or some other sensor that is mounted on board the ship. And I have this anti-roll gyro, which is the actuator, which can apply torque to cancel that torque applied by the waves. Okay. Now the goal of this control system is to maintain the orientation of the ship. Okay. I don't want it to rock back and forth. The rolling motion should be made 0. So the reference command for this control system is 0. Okay. That is the desired position about the roll axis of the ship. Okay. How do we do that? We use state feedback. U is equal to minus k times x, let us say. Then we would have the model here would be x dot is equal to in the presence of disturbance ax plus bu plus b times d naught, because the same input, u plus d naught is the input, right? So b times d naught. Okay. Now if I apply state feedback, which is about the only thing I know and I have been taught so far, right? So x dot is equal to a minus bk times x plus b d naught. Okay. Now what is the solution to this? And y is equal to c times x. Before we solve this, why are we doing this? Why are we trying to solve this? We want a relationship that will help us quantify the extent by which we were able to reject d naught, right? In the previous example of the amplifier, I could tell you that I could reject d naught by a factor of 1000 or a factor of 100 based on the feedback gains that I picked. Okay. Here similarly, can I relate the entries of my k vector here, which is a feedback vector? My u is equal to minus k times x will have some n elements there, right? Minus k1, k2, k3 up to kn. Can I relate them to the extent by which I can reject d naught? That is what I am trying to seek through in my attempt to solve this equation. So I know the solution. X dot is equal to e to the power a minus bk times t times x naught plus integral 0 to t e to the power a minus bk times t minus tau, right? Then b u of tau, u is the input, in this case it is d naught of tau d tau. Okay. This is going to be my response of the system. Now what is the output y? Output y is equal to c times x, right? So it's going to be equal to c times e to the power a minus bk t x naught plus c times integral 0 to t e to the power a minus bk times t minus tau b u of tau d tau. Okay. Now if my system is stable, in other words, I can always choose my gains k such that the eigenvalues of a minus bk are all on the left half of the complex plane. I can do that, and therefore all the modes associated with e to the power a minus bk t will all be decreasing exponentials. I can make sure of that. So if I wait for some time, that amount of time I wait is dependent, as we discussed, on the inverse of the real part of the smallest eigenvalue, so the dominant pole. Okay. So if I wait for that time scale, this term here will go to 0, because that initial state x naught will get weighted down by decreasing exponentials, which will progressively take it to 0. So what I will be left with is this particular term here. So y after the initial condition has been erased out is approximately given by c integral 0 to t e to the power a minus bk times t minus tau b d naught of tau d tau. Okay, this is the expression. Now you tell me, can I stare at this expression and tell, just by looking at this expression, by what extent this d naught is going to get suppressed as a consequence of state feedback? Can I do that? Just compare this expression with the one that we obtained for the simple amplifier case. Okay, so where we had again an input disturbance acting. This was the expression that we obtained for the amplifier case. I knew here there was a direct proportionality between y and d, and I knew what the proportionality constant was. And I could tell by looking at the proportionality constant that I can guarantee that I can reject this input disturbance by a factor of 100, okay, given the plant that I have on my hands. I could guarantee that to you, okay. Now look at this equation again. Isn't it complex enough to give you a headache? Isn't it complex enough to, even if you are able to get familiar with it, there is really no direct connection between the gains k, k1, k2, and so on of that feedback vector, okay, and the extent by which I am able to reject the disturbance d0. That is the problem of this formalism, okay. So as great as the state space formalism is from the point of view of stabilization of a dynamic system, I could very easily and in a very transparent manner stabilize my dynamic system by pole placement, and I could easily choose the gains of my feedback, of the feedback law, such that my closed loop poles were placed wherever they had to be placed. But this strategy is not as attractive and as useful when it comes to the problem of control of uncertain systems. Okay, I cannot, by looking at this, predict ahead of time by what extent my disturbance is going to get attenuated. Okay, that's the problem with this formalism. And this problem becomes worse if I take into account the uncertainty associated with my system. So suppose the matrix A is not known very well. Okay, so suppose A is known only to an extent. So I know A to be equal to A0, plus there is a certain uncertainty associated with the entries of that matrix A. In other words, the last row of that matrix A had minus A1, minus A2, all the way up to minus AN, right? So all those, let us say, those are all coefficients whose values are dependent on the values of the physical, springs and masses and dampers that constitute masses and that constitute my physical system. If I have uncertainty there, they will translate to an uncertainty in the A matrix itself. In which case, the actual output y will be equal to C integral 0 to t e to the power A0 plus delta A minus B k. Suppose B for the moment is not uncertain, then t minus tau times B d0 of tau t tau. If the first problem itself was hard enough for us to understand and comprehend as engineers, right? How much is y getting suppressed? As a, what is the ratio between d0 and y? In a manner that we saw in the previous example, how much is d0 getting suppressed as a consequence of state feedback? If that problem is difficult for even the case when I have no uncertainty with my plant's model, how much more difficult would it be when I have an extra uncertain term delta A thrown into the mix, right? So this is really, a moment that we control engineers dread, because we are now not in a position to understand and predict by what extent our disturbances get attenuated. Okay, and this is the point at which we seek an alternate tool for performing control, a tool through which even for a dynamic system, okay, even when I have derivatives of y etc. on the left hand side, and also derivatives of u, which I have not considered in this problem, by the way, even in such situations, I will be able to predict by what extent, in a very transparent manner, by what extent I can reject disturbances, whether or not I have uncertainties in my system's dynamics. Okay, that is what I seek to do. So at the heart of this problem, is the fact that the relationship between input and output was a very simple one for the previous case, right? For the previous case, when there was no dynamics, I had the input to be u, the output to be y, and I could write y is equal to k times u. A simple proportion was what related the input and the output in the previous case. Here, however, at the heart of the problem is that firstly, I have a exponential of a matrix, which is a very difficult thing for me to imagine. Even if I were to diagonalize the matrix and so on, it is still not a straightforward thing, because I have, e to the power that matrix times t minus tau multiplying d naught of tau. It's not a straightforward product. This is what is known as a convolution integral. Okay, so the output is the convolution of this term c e to the power a times t minus tau times b. Okay, so y is a convolution, so it's 0 to t. I will call this small p of t minus tau. What is the dimension of small p? You can see that it's a scalar, because b is a n by 1 vector, and e to the power something is a n by n matrix, and c is a 1 by n vector. Okay, so when I multiply all the three, I get a 1 by 1 vector, or in other words, a scalar. Okay, I'll get this p of t minus tau, and or maybe I'll call it g of t minus tau instead of p, because it's a more commonly used term, d naught of tau t tau. Okay, this is the relationship between the input and the output. It's a convolution of this function g of t with the function d naught, and convolution is a non-intuitive operation because it involves multiplying d naught with g of t minus tau and then integrating that from 0 to t. Every single one of them is non-intuitive for me. Okay, and that is the reason why I'm not able to predict how much my d naught is going to get suppressed as a consequence of state feedback. Any questions about the limitations with the formalism that we have been using so far to tackle the problem of the uncertain feed systems control? Okay. Now, it turns out that even for a system whose input-output relationship is given by this, it is possible to come up with a proportional relationship, because a proportional relationship was what was at the heart of my ability to predict things, right? I can come up with a proportional relationship, but I cannot do it in the time domain. I have to transform these signals and go to a different domain where the transformation of that output is capital Y, and a transformation of the input is capital U, and a transformation of that amplification, the relationship, the dynamic relationship is some other capital G. Okay, so when I transform it, it is possible to connect that two by means of a proportional relationship of the kind that you saw for the simple proportional amplifier. Okay, and this transformation is Fourier transformation. Okay, it's called Fourier transform. I cannot work in the time domain if I seek a proportional relationship between the input and the output. But if I transform the signals, if I transform the output, transform the input, and transform the dynamics also, then I can get a proportional relationship, but which is frequency dependent. And that is done by using the machinery of Fourier transforms. Okay. So I know that most of you here are mechanical engineers. Can I have a show of hands of how many of you have come across Fourier transforms in your undergrad? Is it completely new to you, or is it something that you have seen? I see 3 hands are up. Okay, that's a rather small number for a class which has about 18 people. What about Laplace transforms? How many of you have come across Laplace transforms in your undergrad? How many of you have been exposed to Laplace transforms? Okay, practically everyone has been exposed to Laplace transforms as far as I can make out. Okay, well, Fourier transforms is like the younger brother to Laplace transforms. In fact, we will talk about Laplace transforms after talking about Fourier transforms, because Laplace transforms is more general, okay, and are very intimately related. Fourier transforms are often used by people in electronics and communication, because they're used to looking at signals in the Fourier domain. It is also used in mechanical engineering by people in acoustics and vibrations. Okay, once again for similar reasons. They are more comfortable looking at the systems in the frequency domain than in the time domain. But for us control engineers, this is the reason why we are interested in Fourier transforms. Okay, we want to have a quantitative relationship between our disturbances, our plant uncertainties for a dynamic plant as well. Okay, between those disturbances and the output for a dynamic plant as well. And that's the reason why we are seeking these tools of Fourier transforms and Laplace transforms. In fact, the same relationship will also hold if you use Laplace transforms. Okay, y of s will be equal to g of s times u of s. So Laplace transform of a convolution of two signals is the product of the Laplace transforms of those two signals. Okay, but from the point of view of intuitiveness and imagination, Laplace transforms is not very useful. It is useful from the point of view of stability analysis. So we shall therefore stick to Fourier transforms. Okay. So let me first define Fourier transforms. So Fourier transform of a signal u is capital U of j omega, and that's given by integral minus infinity to infinity e to the power minus j omega t u of t dt. This is the Fourier transform of a signal u. Okay, I can replace u with y and I will get a similar expression. Okay, it is, and the inverse Fourier transform, as it is called, is going to allow you to reconstruct u of t given u of j omega, capital U of j omega, and the expression for that is small u of t is equal to integral minus infinity to infinity capital U of j omega e to the power j omega t d omega. Okay, now I find this choice of the word transform a rather unfortunate one, especially for us control engineers. Okay, because the word transform brings to mind a complete change in the appearance of the signal. Okay, in a way that is true. U of t had a certain form and u of j omega will have an entirely different form. But this equation here helps us breathe new life. It gives us a new way of looking at the Fourier transform. Okay, there's another word for u of j omega. It's also called as frequency spectrum, or even more evocatively, frequency content. Okay, now this is very useful because what this frequency content tells is that it quantifies how much of a particular frequency exists in the signal small u of t. So therefore, in my mind, I'm imagining small u of t as being constructed out of some basic signals, and those signals happen to be these complex exponentials e to the power j omega t. Okay, I'm building it out of these elementary signals e to the power j omega t. Okay, what quantity of each elementary signal do I need to build my overall signal small u of t? That is given by this term capital U of j omega. This is a far more physical thing. Okay, so to give an analogy, let us take your house. Okay, your house is built out of lots of different materials. You have wood going in there, you have bricks going in there, you have sand you're going in there, you have some sort of powder. So your paint, probably some powder mixed in oil or something and then applied over your house. That's gone in there. Okay, and your foundation has big boulders. Okay, boulders are at least fairly big stones, cuboidal stones that would go into making of the foundation. Okay, now if I were to ask you to catalog how many of each of these exist in your house, then what will you do? You will go and count how many kilograms or how many numbers of these big boulders are there, and how many of those bricks are there, how many gravel exist, have gone into construction of your house, how many individual powders, individual particles of powder has gone into construction of your house, and then you will give me a report. Okay, you will give me a report where you say, I have this many kilograms of powder, that many kilograms of bricks, or this many number of powder, particles of powder, that many number of bricks, that many number of boulders, that many number of gravel, etc., etc. So therefore, you have broken up your house, which is in this case analogous to an actual signal, and written it out in terms of some basic building blocks. It could be gravel, it could be bricks, it could be wood, it could be powder, whatever that be. And you have created a list of what quantity of every one of these has gone into construction of your house. Okay, that's precisely what is done in this equation also. Okay, my house is now constructed. Now house is replaced by the signal. My signal is constructed by these terms e to the power j omega t, and omega can assume all values from minus infinity to infinity. So these are all the terms that are there. Okay, if I pick any one of these building blocks, as we can call them, what quantity of this do I need to construct my house? I need u of j omega times d omega quantity of it. Okay, and to get my overall house, I need to add up all of these materials. That's where the integration comes in. Okay, and I have a normalizing factor here, 1 by 2 pi, and that gives me the signal u of t. Okay, so it is far more useful to view capital U as frequency content of the signal small u. Okay, because it tells you how much, what quantity of a signal of the kind e power j omega t is needed for me to construct my signal small u of t. Okay, that's why it's also called as a frequency content and or frequency spectrum. If you think about it, where else have you come across the term frequency spectrum? You might have come across this in your primary school, right? You talk of spectrum of visible light, and if you think about it, that's exactly what you are doing there. Also, you pass light through a prism, and you split it up into its constituent colors, and what you are recognizing there is that the light, white light, is comprised of this many quantities of violet, that much quantity of green, and so on and so forth. Add them all up together, and what you get is white light. Okay, so there also you are sort of breaking up this signal, which is in that case white light, into its constituent wavelengths or frequencies. Of course, you are discretizing it because our eyes are sensitive only to green and violet and so on, but you also have other wavelengths there. You have a continuum of wavelengths. Okay, and then you are reporting how much of every single wavelength there is. When sunlight appears yellowish to you, that's because the quantity of yellow color in sunlight is so much more than other colors. Okay, so if I were to take its Fourier, if I were to take its spectrum, the intensity of sunlight around the yellow wavelength will be very high, much higher than at other wavelengths, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this interpretation of the Fourier transform is a very useful one. So what we shall do in the next lecture is to see how we can use Fourier transforms. So we'll maybe look at the Fourier transforms of a few common signals, and then we will see how we can use Fourier transforms to quantify the extent by which disturbances can be rejected, or come up with, in other words, a proportional relationship between input and output. Then we will look at Laplace transforms, which allow us to expand the range of signals to which this kind of a product relationship can be extended. Okay, often control engineers are interested in signals which do not possess a Fourier transform. So for example, this integral is going all the way from minus infinity to plus infinity. There are some signals which cannot be integrated. I mean, when you integrate, they'll blow up. From 0 to infinity, when you integrate them, they'll blow up, or the integral will be undefined. So even for such signals, if you want to define a finite frequency content, okay, then you use what is known as Laplace transforms. Okay, we will discuss both of them in the next lecture before using them for performing control design. So when I say control design, I'm again, we are focusing on these two problems. Suppose I have disturbances and I want to reject them by a certain amount. How do I do it? I tell you quantitatively, I want them gone by 99%. How do I choose my controller to get that to happen? Likewise, I have some uncertainty in my plant model, and I want my output to vary by less than 1% due to that uncertainty. How do I design my controller? Now, the other wrinkle to this problem, which we have not discussed so far, is the problem of stability engineering. That we will take up next class. Okay, we'll survey only these analytical tools in the next class, and then we will use these tools to develop control systems where we would wear both these caps, one of stability engineering as well as one of performance engineering. Okay, so we'll stop at this point. Any questions? Okay, so if there are no questions, then I shall sign off at this point. Thanks a lot.